Thank you for watching my videos. Please can you like the video and subscribe to my channel. If you can share the video, that would be great. Thank you for your help. The XJS, a prototype four-wheel drive twin-turbo car built by Jaguar in the late 1980s, has been a subject of interest since its cancellation in the ill-fated XJ41. The XJS was intended to be a successor to the XJS but faced significant challenges due to its expensive, heavy and slow development. However, the XJS remains in a Jaguar Daimler Heritage Trust storage facility, with evidence of early development work on the 4.0-litre AJ6 twin-turbo engine and all-wheel drive from a distance. The XJS appears to be a clean example of late 1980s vintage, featuring US-style twin-front headlights and unusual-looking alloys. However, closer inspection reveals a deeper, more pronounced front chin spoiler, a lower-mounted radiator, and an intercooler. The engine is bolt upright and mounted further back in the bay than usual, with a chrome-clad cover protecting the twin turbos by the exhaust manifold. The exterior features flared wheel arches, tailpipes, a different rear suspension setup, and a transversely mounted exhaust silencer. Inside, the fascia is a neat hybrid of pre- and post-facelift models with some other quirks for good measure. The gear lever is mounted further back than usual, the transmission tunnel is wider, and the seats move manually. An extra warning light on the steering column shroud for an auxiliary water pump is also present. Firing up the power unit is simple, with a flick of the key prompting the fuel pump to whir and the engine stirring into life. The engine noise is just a little gruffer than a conventional AJ6, with the bigger bore exhaust playing a different tune to the norm. Upon entering twisty roads, the added reassurance of four-wheel drive is evident. The brakes feel slightly wooden, possibly due to lack of use, but work very well, and the grip from the aging tires is impressive. The 5-speed manual gearshift is familiar to anyone with a late manual XJS or XJ Saloon, but it feels tighter, sturdier almost, and the clutch is heavier too. In normal road conditions, there's nothing to suggest that this is any different from a conventional XJS. However, when the rev counter doesn't work, pushing a little harder on the throttle results in an aggressive thrum through the floor pan. Progress is good from low down, but as the revs rise further, and with very little fuss, the turbos kick in, and acceleration like we've never experienced from a 6-cylinder AJ6 unleashes itself like a twister through the Gulf of Mexico. Anecdotal evidence points to the engine being well in excess of 330 bhp, but finding the limits of its performance potential on public roads is not on the to-do list. What is clear is that this is a very competent package. The weakest aspect is the steering, which feels out of its depth compared to the solid feel of the other mechanicals. The XJS is a fascinating piece of Jaguar's history, representing the seeds of something rather special. It has a bulletproof engine, gearbox and suspension, but there is judder through the rack and a lack of precision that undoes some of the progress made by the revised suspension and all-wheel drive setup. The underpinnings of this XJS were developed, and the new engine and driveline have undoubtedly imbued Jaguar's sporting GT with a totally different character. More confident, more aggressive, this all-wheel drive XJS performs with gusto and corners with a seemingly infinite ability. Yet none of the famed refinement, steering shortcomings aside, has disappeared. This is a fascinating piece of Jaguar's history, the remnants of a path Brown's Lane ultimately never walked down, fortunately. The path it did take led to great success in the sporting GT arena, but one can't help but wonder what the company's fate would have been if it had gone down this all-wheel drive instead. Long before the X-Type appeared, in terms of its driveline, enlarging the transmission tunnel to squeeze a transfer case in behind the gearbox must have been relatively easy. The real problem was at the front, where both the main chassis legs and road springs sat directly in the path of any new drive shafts. The solution was to build new and possibly weaker upwardly curved chassis legs, and use a variation on the XJ40 subframe design to move much of the load back behind the wheel centerline. A much smaller and stronger spring sits just behind the driveshaft, tapered in the middle to allow adequate clearance. The front differential, driven by a shaft running forward from the transfer case, is bolted to the left side of the engine sump, with the right-hand driveshaft passing through the sump itself. Constant velocity joints allow reduced steering movement, but because of space limitations, the rack is mounted within a bolted two-piece subframe, with the tie rod ends exiting each end. For brakes, XJ40-type sliding calipers are mounted forward of the disc. The rear of the car has been adapted to take an XJ40-type rear axle assembly, with new rear chassis legs incorporating the required spring seat, mounting bosses for the forward A-frame mounts, and behind the axle, brackets extending down to take the diagonal brace bars. Serious consideration must have been given to making at least the engine and drivetrain a production reality, because although the engine has an experimental number, many of the other special components, including the modified offset wheels and cast air ducts, have conventional Jaguar part numbers. If it were being developed today thanks to advanced computer modeling, this car would probably never exist. However, in the 1980s and into the 1990s, it was standard practice for manufacturers to prove a new model's major components by installing them first in modified versions of the existing cars, termed mules or simulators.